Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
Let's talk about positioning. So when we're doing activities, when we're standing up or sitting down, should we be thinking about or planning or deciding where different body parts go or are in relation to one another? Or should we just do things and let them find their own positions by themselves?
Yes, it's a very good question, this, because you will find that, yes, we need to. It's obvious. If you bump your elbow into something hard, you will understand what I mean. If you go bumping into chairs uh, or sliding on the path, how many people fall on the floor is incredible. You have to go to the emergency to discover things like that. The human condition is well, happening in space with danger. So we have to understand that Alexander's idea of the control of the human habitual reaction is quite important. If you discover that your placing of the feet, for example, is incorrect, because you sprain your ankle, the same ankle all the time, because you have a bad back on one side all the time, you must understand that there are causes and effects. So, yes, positioning is a very good question. But there are different ways to think about positioning. So today I thought I would start to explain a bit more how I came about studying text about the Alexander technique, because there is a little story behind it, and how in studying text, well, when I say text, of course, I mean FM Alexander books and FM Alexander's letters and FM Alexander's articles that are quite interesting. And so in translating these books, I had more than just uh, a survey or study. I had to connect things together and understand and try and more understand what Alexander was saying, because I had trouble understanding things. I had many trouble. So when you decide you're going to position yourself in space in a conscious way, you're starting to enter conscious guidance and control. This is the how Alexander named his work: conscious guidance and control. There is very little spontaneity in conscious guidance and control. It's always a surprise for most people that are coming from the somatic world, where freedom of expression and I don't know, uh, doing what you want, or letting nature be is one sort of very strong magnet for their reasoning. And so conscious guidance and control has very little to do with it. So Alexander based his conscious guidance and control system on giving instructions and giving series of instructions at the same time, combining these instructions and making decisions of movements. That's what I want to demonstrate. And so most people, of course, know that Alexander was using instructions. Most people know what what I call the orders of prevention, preventive orders. Let the neck be free, to let the head go forward and not to let the back lengthen and widen. These are orders that are given by the teacher to the pupil to repeat or rehearse, as Alexander used that word coming from the theater world. So I want to start with this, and we are going to see how positioning comes into place, come into view. So the first thing is to first discover why I say that neck free, head forward, and up back to lengthen and widen are preventive orders. So I want to share a portion of a text. Thus, to return to the example under consideration, we will suppose that I have requested the pupil to order the spine to lengthen and the neck to relax. Well, of course, this is from man supreme inheritance. So this is the old terminology. Alexander at that time did not ask the person to think of the neck to be free and the back to lengthen and widen. But it was it's a slight change. It's just ordering the spine to lengthen and the neck to relax. So then we come to the very, very important part. If instead of merely framing and holding this desire in his mind, he attempts the physical performance of these acts, he will invariably stiffen the muscle of his neck and shorten his spine, since these are the movements habitually associated in his mind with lengthening the spine, and the muscle will contract in accordance with the old associations. In effect, it will be seen that in this, as in all other cases, stress must be laid on the point that it is the means and not the end which must be considered. When the end is held in mind, instinct or long habit will always seek to attain the end by habitual method. The action is performed below the level of consciousness in its various stages and only arises to the level of consciousness when the end is being attained by the correct means whereby. So there are very, very important things that Alexander is saying here. But you only see them if you slow down sufficiently and if you try to distantiate yourself from the text and start to really think at what Alexander is saying. So Alexander requests the pupil to order the spine to lengthen. I will start with that one. And he's asking the person not to act on this order. There is no indication that the pupil has to obey. The pupil should refuse to obey one order he is giving himself. So it's quite a strange idea. And so he wants the pupil to frame this idea in his mind. Well, when you say to frame a desire in the mind, you're starting to understand that Alexander wants us to work intellectually with the simple idea. It's a simple action. I want you to lengthen the spine. Well, Alexander says by framing the desire in the mind, Alexander says that no, this is not a simple action. This is not an action you can give consent to and leave your, sensory appreciation, your habit of feeling these movements act for you. Framing in the mind for me started to mean that it was necessary to investigate the conditions that would make the spine shorten and the others that would make the spine lengthen. So in my training course, I was trained in a Carrington style in the 1990s. These questions were never asked because the solution was already present. With his hand, the teacher would take, and realize what is lengthening the back for you. In the same way that Alexander, when he was still alive, was in fact making the different movements that were necessary to obtain what we call the spine to lengthen, the back to lengthen and widen. And so no question were asked about this framing in the mind. And so for us, it was a position. Of course, we were not positioning ourselves because the teacher was positioning us. The definition, the understanding, the grounding of the order was somatic. We didn't have to imagine means whereby. The means whereby were used. There was a word that we called means whereby, but it was different. It was not the means whereby Alexander discusses when he says framing and holding the desire in the mind. So, of course, we were not attempting the physical performance of these acts because they were made for us by a somatic teacher, an expert manipulator, as we have started to call them now. And so it was interesting to see that the learning was somatic. And I started to observe the results of the learning. When you say that somebody is learning something, of course, what is happening is that you want the person to be able to perform the activity on his own without the help of an expert manipulator. So you want to see how the person is going to sit and stand, how the person is going to position the different parts of the body. And so I started to have misgivings. I started to observe around the teachers. Not well, yes. Very often, when you observe what is happening to the pupil. So you think, okay, the pupil looks much better, and so and so. But I started to observe teachers, and I started to see things that were quite strange. I started to. It was a time when what is now the big problem, saying the monkey position, which is a flexion of the knees without a flexion of the ankle, started to disappear. There was a tendency for some teachers to put hands on people without any regard for mechanical advantage. They became so sensitive, so somatically enlightened, that they didn't need to lengthen the back at all. You have to remember that Alexander's definition of lengthening the back is geometric. There are many people that ignore that when Alexander explained the sentence to lengthen the back, he's talking of a curve. He's taking the very, very practical example of a piece of paper. And when you take a piece of paper, you can, in fact, affect movements to the different parts of the page. You can have the extremity and the center move in different directions. The movements, very important, associated, will create a shape. You are positioning the curve. In fact, it's easy to analyze that 3 movements at least are necessary for a curve to start to be a page to be curved. And Alexander's explained that his vision of back to lengthen and widen, especially in the lumbar area, is exactly that, geometric. So we see that when the person forgets to frame the idea in the mind, the person will in fact produce the activity spontaneously according to the guidance of the feeling sense. And the person will make movements with the different parts of the back. And these movements are the means whereby the person is using to, in fact, shorten the spine and contract the neck. That's what I started to see clearly looking at this. So Alexander says it is the means and not the end which must be considered. That is, order the spine to lengthen is an end, is not a means. And also the neck to relax is a means, is an end and not a means. So this was a total reversal of the the education of the stat at the time. The education system was that the means whereby were inhibition, saying no, quite a general no, and thinking mental orders. Well, thinking mental orders was meant to, in fact, produce something. I've heard some fantastic ideas that thinking some orders would change the tonic activity, for example. There are some teachers that are proposing this kind of explanation to explain how the Alexander technique was taught in the 90s. They are not explaining what Alexander proposes or his theories or his ideas. No, they're explaining how the technique was taught in the 90s. And when that is the case, well, you find that these teachers are saying that coordination is subconscious, that you cannot, in fact, inform your own coordination, but by the means of thinking ideas that are going to be transformed in some sort of new movement, new tonic activity that will come someday. Well, there was such a difference between what the discourse of the modern Alexander technique is and what I could see of the teachers. I could see that this idea of, for example, having the back was just words. There is nothing that indicates, for example, that Walter here has a back. Well, this is in 99. Of course, it's the end of his teaching career, and many people say, well, he had trouble with his hips, hip replacement, and so this explained the poor quality of his use. Well, for me, it explains nothing. If you have a hip replacement, you should use all your conscious guidance and control in order to organize the conditions for the spine to lengthen. And here you have the protruding abdomen, you have the unduly lifted front part of the chest. You can see where the support of the ankle is. You can see that the middle torso and the lower torso are very, very far forward. This cannot be a position of mechanical advantage. That's what the way I was thinking at the time. I said, well, we are trusting people to teach us how to, in fact, implement the Alexander technique. And when I look at the sort of positioning that Alexander was producing or providing to the pupil with his hands, I say, how can I make sense of these two images? It's absolutely strange. And I choose Walter because it's a fantastic person, but there are many, many other examples. I went through the internet, I went to conferences, and I started to really observe how people were guiding themselves. Very often when you go to a conference or gathering of Alexander teachers, everybody is interested in how to manipulate people with the hands. Well, it's the essence of the modern Alexander technique business. But I was not. I was interested in how the teacher manipulating others was in fact manipulating ideas, framing ideas in his mind, and what was his understanding of the means whereby. So I compared with what Alexander is saying. This is another example. He says the desire to stiffen the neck muscle should be inhibited as a preliminary, which is not the same thing at all as a direct order to relax the muscles themselves. And then the true uses of the muscular mechanism, that is the means of placing the body in a position of mechanical advantage, must be studied, when the work will naturally devolve on those muscles intended to carry it out, and the neck will be relaxed unconsciously. In this case, the conscious orders, by which I mean the orders given to the right muscles, are preventive orders, and the due sequence of cause and effect is maintained. Obviously, this is not simple thinking. Obviously, the writing may sound very difficult, but Alexander is really making a point here. So we are discussing again this idea of giving an order of let the neck be free or relax the neck, as we've seen in the previous. And this is part of a sequence where the neck has to be free, the back has to lengthen and widen, and the head has to go forward and up. So when you see this, Alexander is not asking to inhibit a movement, he's asking to inhibit a desire. So he then gives the solution. And the solution is to study. So I said, well, this is well in line with this idea of reeducation. You have to study. And so at first I thought that we had to study the position of mechanical advantage. Because when you look at what a lesson is about, but you see that the teacher is placing the different parts of the torso of the person in a certain position. Well, in certain relations, one relatively to the other. It's absolutely obvious that the back is far back from the head, for example. Or even you could say that the back part where Alexander has his hands is very far back relatively to the front of the sternum, which is obviously not the case when Walter is manipulating a person. His back and his upper chest are very close together. There is a movement of the upper sternum going back in space. There is a movement of the back going forward in space. The distance between the two spots is getting smaller. In the case of the student Alexander is manipulating, it's completely the opposite. The back has a tendency to go back and the sternum has a tendency to go away from it, so that the horizontal distance between the two spots is increasing. And this, you will see, has something to do with the instruction that was used in the first training course. That is, you have to keep your back back. This is reported by Peggy Williams, so I think this is right. Alexander was very, very fond of this instruction, back, back. But there is a difficulty, is that you don't know back, back from what in relation to what. So it's very easy for such an instruction to be lost. Well, you will repeat it to someone else and the person will think that back, back is something that you feel when you're positioned by the teacher. So nowadays, the modern Alexander teacher consider that positioning oneself is bad, being positioned by someone else, by the teacher, is good. Which is a strange play of words, in fact. Because I don't see why it would be bad to position oneself when you see that by, well, trusting to the feeling sense, trusting to remembering what it is to lengthen the back, you end up shortening and compressing the torso. So I can't understand why some positioning can be good and some positioning can't. Well, at the time, it was clear that back was very, very strongly in the front of the teaching, and it appears that now it is gone. It has gone in the sense that some people may use it, but what is when you frame in the mind this desire? What do you frame? Where are the means whereby that you study the means of placing the body in a position of mechanical advantage? I started to have this shift in my mind and say, oh yes, I am not to study the position. That somebody will place me in a position is not going to help me at all, because what we need to study is the means of placing the body, the mechanism of the torso, in a position of mechanical advantage. How can one individual, myself or my student, use instructions in order to study the means? And so there are means, and the means of placing the body in the position of mechanical advantage are the movements of the different parts of the torso, which coordinated together will produce the geometry we are looking for. So that was a completely new idea. It came out of just reading a sentence. Of course, it could be that I was placing too much in the text. I agree. This is really possible. Some people say that I'm reading too much into the words. Well, that's not the point. The point was the question that was raised. I started to imagine, well, yes, okay, the means, I must study the means of placing the body. And there are some organization of the parts which should, in fact, bring the condition that we know as back to lengthen and widen and neck free. And we know these conditions just because we have some examples. We have photos of Alexander. We see Alexander standing. We see Alexander squatting, for example. And there are certain geometric characteristics that spring to the eye. And we have a representation of what it meant for Alexander. So if you take the time, you will find that they are constant. There is a constant lengthening of the back from the sacrum right to the middle of the thoracic, the vertebral thoracic curve, the primary curve around T7. You will find that in all this picture, there is this. And then there is also another constant, is the constant direction of the head forward and up from the hump. That's Wilfred Barlow expression. The head has to be directed forward and up from the hump between being the distance that is created by having the thoracic spine very far away from the back. The back is back from the first thoracic vertebrae in every single Alexander picture. So there was this idea that, okay, we are starting to observe what is happening between the sitting bones and the first thoracic vertebrae, which is what Alexander called the mechanism of the torso. And studying the means of placing the body became like, an obsession for me. And so we have neck free. What is neck free? Well, Alexander is very straightforward. He says the specific control of the neck should primarily be the result of the conscious guidance and control of the mechanism of the torso, particularly of the antagonistic muscular actions, which bring about with correct and greater coordination intended to control the movements of the limbs, neck, respiratory activity, and the general activity of the internal organs. Well, this is man's supreme inheritance. This is the first. I've shown this is page 141 in the second edition, 1918, but this text is already present in the 1910 edition. If you don't see here the precursor of what we call nowadays the primary control, well, I don't know where you are going to find the primary control, because this is it. And so I started to think, okay, fine. The neck conditions depends on the mechanism of the torso movements. The length of the spine also depends on the mechanical conditions of the movement of the mechanism of the torso. And I say, well, yes. So framing in the mind started to take a real signification for me. It was really to think, okay, how do I understand which movements are producing the shortening and which movements of the different parts of the torso are producing the lengthening? Well, most people think that neck free is the result of a certain activity of the muscle, and that it's something you can only feel with the hands. I started to doubt this idea. I started to doubt it because I've seen so many Alexander teachers saying that's it while manipulating people. And the person making fantastic, surprised, oh, that's it, being so happy. But when I was looking at the relationship between the different parts, I could see that nothing very fundamental had changed in the mechanism of the torso. The person was still pulling down quite a lot during a lesson. And when you just wait 2 seconds after the teacher has taken the hands out, and you look at the person walking around with that glare and that fantastic feeling of lightness, well, the lightness is only in the sensory appreciation of the person, because in fact, the person is still directing the ankle inward, still having the knees completely distorted, still pulling the back forward, still. So I started to have this realization that what the fantastic effect that is fable that the Alexander technique is producing is, yes, a sensory effect. But the organization of the movements of the part is certainly not studied in this way. The person is studying what is suggestion, how a person can suggest herself some effect that are not there. So to relate neck free, head forward and up, or back to length and wide to lengthen and widen to what has just happened is just a misrepresentation of what conscious guidance and control is. It cannot be a feeling. It's impossible. It changes all the time. So I started to investigate, and the specific control of the neck should primarily be the result of conscious guidance and control of the mechanism of the torso. I started to make a connection with the famous hands on the back of a chair procedure. Alexander is talking about the minimum tension possible in the mechanism of the arm. And he explains how to make sure that you have obtained the minimal tension. And the explanation is astonishing. The minimal tension in the arms has nothing to do with what you feel when you touch the person for Alexander. It has to do with the geometry of the fingers, of the wrist, of the elbow, and of the shoulder in relation to the torso that is keeping in place when you pull the elbow slightly downwards and outward. If you can keep the position of the fingers, of the wrist, of the upper torso when the elbows are lightly pulled downwards and outwards, you have reached the minimum tension. When you try and practice this procedure and you try to maintain this position of the different parts, this positioning, if you want, in space, this setting in relation the different parts relatively to one another, but you're not going to feel that this is the minimum of tension, not at all. To your faulty sensory appreciation, this is going to feel like excruciatingly tense. It's quite funny. Suddenly, we have the world that is upside down, where the teachers think that feeling with the hands is the only way to, in fact, approach what Alexander was talking about. Suddenly, I was confronted with an idea that is totally opposed to it. Totally. So, well, it was interesting to follow a little bit more of the procedures that are not taught in the schools, in the training schools of the modern Alexander technique. It was again an incentive to go back to the books and to start to slow down and look really at what Alexander was talking about. So the positioning is discussed by Alexander in many different books, but in particular in Man's Supreme Inheritance, and there is the positioning of the feet. The primary principle in attaining the correct standing position is the placing of the feet. Well, it sounded so strange, I had to investigate. And so you will find that the text hides something that we cannot imagine if we haven't got evidence of what Alexander is talking about. So he said, we have a person, we are going to discuss a moment when he's talking about the frog dance. And so you have a pupil. The pupil is sitting on a chair. That's where the situation is going to occur. And he says, your pupil is sitting on the chair, and he says, let the whole body come forward until the center of gravity falls over the feet. That is to say, until the poise is such that if the chair were removed at this point, you would be left balanced in a position of a person performing the frog dance. So it's obvious that if you lean on a chair and you stop the movement at some point, well, of course, this is taken from a film of a long-distance lesson, but it appears fixed. Yes, when you freeze a film, every frame seems fixed. It's only because there are the number of frames that you see movement. So it's not because you see a person freeze that the person is frozen. The person is not frozen. The person is just performing a movement. The person has been asked to reach toward the wall with the fingers, to touch the fingers, mostly to establish a distance between the torso, between the sternum bone, the bony part of the upper torso, and the wall. And we want the person to establish exactly the same distance as the distance from the front of the ankle to the wall. Well, the idea is the positioning of the feet, if you want to know. There is a geometrical principle that means that when you have two spots that are the same distance from a vertical surface of reference, these two spots that you see here, the front of the ankle and the part of the sternum, are exactly vertical, aligned vertically above one another. Of course, there are no captors, there is no feeling receptors to tell you this. But every one of us can learn to position parts in space. To position two parts in space like this, you have to make an estimation. Estimation is an activity of the mind. This is not physical. You do not estimate by feeling the distance to the wall between the instep and the wall. You cannot. But you can use your mind to do that. Yes, and the subconscious mind can do quite good estimates. And then you have to perform a series of movements, a movement of the pelvis, a movement of the middle torso, a movement of the upper torso, and reach forward. And then if you succeed, it will be clear that the lower part of the sternum is exactly above the instep. You have positioned the torso above the foot. But then what is very interesting here is that we are going to ask the person to perform the frog dance. The idea Alexander was discussing just before is you want to let the whole body come forward. Of course, you understand that by whole body, when you're sitting, Alexander cannot mean the whole body. Of course, if the knees are going forward as you are leaning, when you're sitting, you're going to fall forward. So for him, the whole body, the word body in his mind is like when you discuss horses. The body of horses is the body without the limbs. So you let the whole body come forward, and he says, until the center of gravity falls over the feet. And so you look at this image and you think, that is strange. Because, well, to my eyes, the center of gravity of the torso is certainly not over the feet. And because of it, the teacher, it's a teacher of the Alexander technique. He has taught for many, many years, and then he's discovered what I propose, how I propose to frame the idea of lengthening the back. And so he is performing a certain numbers of movement with the different parts of the torso when he leans forward. That's how I understand framing in the mind a desire to lengthen the back. And as a result, you can see that, yes, there are objective signs. There are things you can see that, make you think that his back is really, in fact, not shortening. You can't see any arching of the lower back. I can tell you that there is no undue lifting of the upper front of the chest. The abdomen is not protruding. So he's doing quite a good job at this. And the job he's doing is the frog dance. But where the problem is in this sentence, or where the problem was for me, was the start. You want the center of gravity to fall over the feet, that is to say, until the poise is such that if the chair were removed at this point, you would be left balanced in a position of a person performing the frog dance. That sounds quite what is happening here. There is no chair, and Alexander is poised. But my problem started when I wanted to calculate the center of gravity position relatively to the feet. What is the placing of the feet relatively to the mechanism of the torso? And the problem is very, very simple. Is that I was falling backward when I was trying to reach the 22 degrees in that way, because for me this had nothing to do with having the center of gravity over the feet. For me, the center of gravity is backward relatively to the feet. It's amazing, but this man was doing something I was incapable of doing. And when I started to observe other images, and I started to see, okay, if I take the front of the ankle and I take the sternum bone, well, there is a geometrical relationship that I can see. Yes. And I say, well, fine, you want to organize the torso relatively to the feet. It's the placing of the feet in relation with the torso, or the placing of the torso in relation to the feet. And so you think, okay, that's fine. Well, no, it's not. It's not fine. Because when you start to try and play at this and organize the movements of the parts of the torso so that they look like Alexander, well, I will tell you, it's very simple. Your sensory appreciation will not allow it. You will have the neat impression that you're falling backward. And it's not only an impression. You see your toes going off the floor. You see yourself starting to be agitated. It's very, at first, very difficult. Well, your sensory appreciation of equilibrium is really stimulated. When you start, you see, I was using rulers in order to get all the bony parts of the torso to be at a certain distance from the front of the ankle. So I started to notice, as I've already said many times, that it was uncanny how Alexander's organization of the position of the feet relatively to the torso was similar to the Delsart system of gestural organization of the movements. I started to think, okay, I get a certain organization between the feet and the front of the mechanism of the torso, and suddenly, well, there are all sorts of results. First of all, you see that the back is lengthened, and you see that there is a hump, and that the head is very far forward from the hump, exactly as Barlow said. So I said, wow, this is uncanny. But this has nothing to do with the modern Alexander technique. This is conscious guidance and control. There is no freedom of expression in this. Some teachers may say, but this is absolutely horrendous. Look at that. It's all fixed. Yes, it's fixed by rulers of the same length to a vertical surface of reference. So yes, it has nothing to do with free expression. It has to do with using instruction, with reasoning instructions in order to perform some positioning. We want to position the torso in relation with the feet, which is quite strange. And then we come back to the central problem. The frog dance for me was the central problem for many years because I was falling backward. It was impossible for me to get to that organization or that positioning of the feet in relation with the torso. So here is my reasoning. At one moment, I started to think, wow, if you think of stacks, if you think of having different body parts that you will stack above one another, and you want to perform an equilibrium, what Alexander poise, well, you must understand that this is impossible. That it's with the simple weight of the part as acting as forces around a center of rotation that is the ankle. This cannot stand in this way. There must be other forces. And the forces we are discussing is that the man is not using the contraction of this muscle to stay in place. If you try to use contraction of the muscle to stay in place, it's impossible to get the 22 degrees. With the muscle, I've seen teachers being able to do that, but their torso, the upper torso, is like 40 or 50 degrees forward. No, we are very interested in the 22 degrees because this is a procedure of conscious guidance and control, but essentially it's a procedure of control. If you don't know how to get the back, this is impossible. This is absolutely unfeasible. And if there are Alexander teachers listening to this, I really ask them to try and film themselves while they are going into monkey, and while they are going from the monkey, what we call position, to the position of the frog dance, and they will find. So some people object to the frog dance, because French people, and I'm myself French, have been segregated by the English for centuries by telling that we are frogs. I don't mind using the sentence "the frog dance," or when I'm talking about a human bending, as I'm not at all concerned about using the old word monkey to talk about a flexion, because for me, I do not associate these words with racism. And there is racism for the French, I understand, and racism for many other kind of different people. I do not partake in this. I'm just discussing geometry and placing of parts in space. So this has nothing to do with a manifesto of freedom for the people. I think that people are all equal. So you can use the word monkey or the word frog without really affecting me. So this is the question. What are the forces that Alexander found in order to allow this to be possible? And so I came back to my idea of what it is to keep the back. And this is another student that is performing so what I call the monkey procedure, or is stopped in after bending the knee and hip. Is bend the knee and hip as hinges. As you can see, is inhibited the movement of bending the ankle. As a result, his flexion looks rather strange. But this is not the point. The point is that he's wearing a girdle. It's handkerchief or something that is a band that he's got, and I asked him to place the band over his shoulders. I wanted to show that keep your back is not a position at all. It's an antagonistic action. As you can see, there is an action on the upper torso that is provided or represented by the girdle So we can see that the girdle is pulled forward and slightly downward, exactly as Alexander asked us to, in the hands on the back of a chair procedure, have the tip of the elbow pulled outward and slightly downward. It's the same effect that we have here. But for the back to be shown as it is here, it is necessary to also, in fact, have in mind a pull. It's not a movement in the sense, because if he was to continue the movement, he should arch the back. No, he's just producing enough of a pull of the back to keep the relationship between the pelvis and the upper torso. As a result, you will find that it's possible for him that, or I will show this image, it's exactly the same idea. Why is the teacher touching the wall? Well, in a way, you have to understand that the habit of his teacher of going up from sitting has always been to reach forward with the middle torso and in fact arch the back, unduly lift the front part of the chest and shorten the stature, because the mechanism of the arm movements are not linked up with the movement of the mechanism of the torso. In this image, they are. He has to. He's been requested to keep the fingers against the wall and keep the elbows outward and slightly downward. It's another version of hands on the back of a chair again. But you can see that in this way, what is happening, the girdle, that is, of course, objective here. In his case, the girdle is of his own making by the fact that he's keeping the hands forward and the elbows directed. We know that there is a constant tendency for the upper torso to go forward. And in order to keep, of course, the torso lengthening, it's necessary to have another instruction that is back, back. It's not a movement as such. We are not asking, but very often people say, yes, your idea of directing movements. Well, the pupil is not directing movements proper. The pupil is directed concerted pulls. There is different idea. Imagine as if there were a cord that was attached to different parts of the body, and that the pupil had the capacity of mind to activate pulls on these different ropes. He would be, in fact, performing the action quite in this way. Of course, it's not all perfect. We can see that the angle is lessening as the person is going upward. We can see that the rotation of the pelvis is not exactly the one we want. But for the moment, this is very interesting, because the person, for once, it's the first time, I think, in his life, he's been able to, in fact, perform the frog dance without shortening the back. So, of course, studying the means cannot be done straight away. You have to, the means, studying the movements that are necessary, or sorry, the pulls that are necessary in order to get the antagonistic action working, well, takes some time. So you have here an idea of a positioning. It's all about positioning, but this is conscious positioning. This is not leaving to the feeling sense, where, you know, engaining, the definition of engaining that Alexander gave in Universal Constant in Living. We will come back to that in the next interview. It is not by, in fact, trusting to the feeling sense that the frog dance lift off the chair can be done. The person feels that it's impossible to go up unless the person really push forwards. No, we want the back to go back. The main direction here is back, back. And so in this case, we can see that the person has, in fact, discovered a new organization that is only possible with conscious guidance and control. The child is using what we call free expression, which is spontaneous movements. And it's very interesting that even before school, when you look at children, you will find that their organization, their placement, their positioning is horrendous most of the time. Well, of course, you need to know a little bit of what Alexander, in fact, means by back to lengthen and widen. If you never investigated it, you will think that this is pure movement. Well, of course, obviously, it's not for me. It's a really the precursor of bad use. So, what the gentleman is doing is certainly not free because it's imposed, because there is a plan. There is a reason plan. He's not standing in the way he would like to stand at a party. No. This is during a session of conscious guidance and control. He's learning something. So he's exploring something he cannot perform on his own yet. Well, ask a young child to change the relationship between the shoulder and the ribs, or change the relationship between the top and the lower torso. Well, the child cannot use instruction in this way. It's absolutely obvious. The child will only be capable of performing free expression gestures, spontaneous gesture. If you see that these gestures are not appropriate, well, you might try and manipulate the child into what you think is a proper position, but it's a really tough battle. I think it's much better to give an example by your own way of organizing, positioning the parts in everything you do, when you sit, when you discuss, and when the person is old enough, capable to understand orders, and capable to frame in mind a series of orders at the same time. Because it's, of course, coordination means simultaneous movements. So if you want to direct simultaneous movements, you have to frame these movements in your mind. You have to understand the mechanism that makes this movement produce the positioning you want to obtain. And so this is the idea behind conscious guidance and control. The idea is not to move like a child. You cannot move like a child. You're not a child anymore. I've heard teachers saying, this is positioning, I want to move like a child. Well, what the person, in fact, says between the lines is that he has no idea what conscious guidance and control means. No idea. He doesn't know that to free oneself, you have to set guidelines and directive very strictly. You have to be able to evaluate, because thinking of a quality of free expression has never made anyone capable of freeing the neck and lengthening the back. So thinking of quality, well, maybe you can attract a few pupils, but it's not professional job. You want really to let the person get rid of these old ideas and discover that it's possible to use instructions in a concerted fashion and really produce changes, really develop the capacity to analyze, frame ideas in mind, refuse to perform actions according to the feeling sense, like neck free, for example. The person must understand that neck free is a relation of the head to the different movements of the parts of the torso. So when you ask the pupil to rehearse the orders necessary to the particular person in question, you must understand that the new orders are not neck free, head forward and up, back to lengthen and widen, because these orders are for everybody. These are the orders of definite inhibition. here, Alexander is talking about something else. I've spent 20 years, in fact, exploring this sentence. What do I ask my pupil to rehearse? Orders necessary to that particular person, or general orders, generic orders? And so if there are other orders, if there are what Alexander sometimes label new orders, what are these new orders? Well, Alexander placed it clear in front of our mind. It's such mental orders or desires which will be in accordance with the correct movements which the teacher will ensure for the pupil during the manipulation which follows. And there is the big question. When you say that the teacher will ensure these correct movements during the manipulation which follows, of course, most people would think, most modern Alexander teacher would think that Alexander is clearly discussing the physical manipulation that the teacher is going to ensure for the pupil. Well, it is going to do them for the pupil, if I understand. So I started to think, could there be another way to see my job as Alexander teacher? Is that the manipulation which follows, could they be the framing in the mind? Could they be the transformation of the framing in the mind of the system of movement into the physical performance by the pupil, not by myself? When I teach nowadays, I teach online. But always, I mean, I do not want to touch the pupil anymore, because if the manipulation which follow the mental orders are physical manipulation done by something else, by somebody else, by an expert manipulator, my theory is that the pupil study the position of mechanical advantage. The pupil will be in a position of mechanical advantage and will explore what it is to be in a position of mechanical advantage. He does not study the means of placing the torso in a position of mechanical advantage. Some people may think, oh, it's nearly the same thing. Well, from the point of view of the pupil, it's absolutely different. Is the pupil capable of, in fact, organizing the movements which make the position of mechanical appear? Well, if he studied the position of mechanical advantage, so being placed there, the teacher more or less knowing which movements are necessary, most of the time nowadays this is more or less lost, the pupil will not have learned the means of placing the body, the whole body, in a position of mechanical advantage. In order for the pupil to learn, we must let the pupil organize the mental manipulation of the orders and the mental manipulation of translating orders of series of orders of movement into the real movement that we are going to see on screen. Is the demonstration clear, Kevin?
Yes. So when Alexander says framing the desire in the mind, he's really talking about what we would now call a mental model, because you have to understand structure, the relations between the different parts, and you have some sort of plan that you're trying to implement or get closer to. And this is very different from just experiencing feelings as a teacher's placing his hands on you.
Yeah. Well, and you have just subsumed my idea. My ideas are, yes, we want a reason plan before entering into the manipulation. I mean, the manipulation of the positioning of our own parts, if you want. The manipulation of positioning is the same thing. So I do teach people how to manipulate the different parts of the torso so that the neck can be said to be free, the head forward and up and the back to lengthen and widen. These are the ends. These ends, this plan for me comes from Alexander demonstration, ocular demonstrations. and also from the Delsart model that he must have used, I think. And the idea is that the instructions themselves have to be absolutely precise. It's absolutely necessary that the pupil understand the mechanism with which he's working in order to get the best out of this mechanism. So yes, it's completely different from having somebody manipulate you into a position of mechanical advantage. The definition of the mental orders is absolutely different in the initial Alexander technique and in the modern Alexander technique. I keep the distinction between new orders, orders necessary to the particular person in order to according to the way the person has been used to move these different parts. It's obvious that a lesson can only be a one-to-one lesson. We have to see how a person translates instructions into action. We have to see what are the impeding movement that the person is performing without feeling anything about it. So this is the crux of conscious guidance and control sessions.
Okay, super, Jeando. For everybody watching the video, you'll get a link to Jeando's website underneath, so you can book a lesson with him if you want. And we will see you in the next video. Thank you, Jeando.
May I add just a comment? I have had many people requesting lessons. It's very simple. Don't send me some sort of letters to explain everything. Just request for lessons are 58 minutes in time. We need to find a time that corresponds to our time zones, and so just ask a lesson. That's it. You don't need to write long essays to have a lesson with me. just request a lesson. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.